We're in Daniel chapter 2, and last week, Daniel and his friends got a knock at the door, and when they answered the door, there was a guard there who said, "Hey, we're here to kill you. We're going to take your life." And Daniel said, "What is this?" And instead of responding in anger, instead of responding how most of us would respond, "That's not my problem, that's not my issue, I don't care if the king had a dream, I don't care if the king can't interpret his dream," he said, "Tell me more." He asked some curious questions, and the Bible says he responded with grace, with wisdom, with something that a lot of us struggle with, and that's composed, measured questions. And so if you didn't listen last week, I encourage you to go download it, listen to it, and you'll follow through and figure out where we are. And we talked about how he responded, but we didn't talk about the actual dream or the interpretation. So this morning, we're going to discuss what the dream was, what it looked like, and why that mattered. So this morning, I want to talk to you about when our dreams become nightmares, because Nebuchadnezzar had a dream that was actually a nightmare for most people. As a matter of fact, when Nebuchadnezzar had this dream, he had a dream of an image. It looked like a human. It looked like a man. It looked like something he liked. It looked good to him. When Daniel had the same dream in a couple of chapters, it looked like a monster. It was the vision of the beast. Same dream, same interpretation, different view. You know why? Because when you're in charge of the empire, it looks good. It looks like a man. When you're being ruled by the empire, it looks like a monster. It looks like the beast. It looks like a problem. This vision that Nebuchadnezzar had was good for him because he got to rule. It wasn't so good for Daniel because he was plucked out of his city, plucked out of his home nation, taught a new language. I haven't really talked about this, and he was made a eunuch. So not only was he removed from his family, the opportunity for him to ever have a family was removed from his future. King Nebuchadnezzar didn't want any studs in the courtyard with him. He didn't want any competition from any manly men. And so Daniel was forced to be a eunuch as a teenager. All the dreams he had for his life, all the plans he may have made, gone because of this king. King Nebuchadnezzar formed this courtyard. He had all these magicians, he had all these fortune tellers, he had all of these soothsayers, he had all these people who could answer his questions, but no one could tell him what the dream he had was because he had a nightmare, had a dream that scared him, spooked him, and he woke up and forgot about it. We've all been there. Maybe you've had a good dream, woke up, wish you could remember it. He woke up, couldn't remember the dream, and he said, "If no one can tell me this dream, I'm going to put all of the wise men to death," including Daniel, including Azariah, Mishael, Hananiah. So his dream became a nightmare for everyone else. And so this morning, I want us to look at the dream. We're going to read through what the dream was in chapter 2, beginning in verse 31. So read with me. It says, this is Daniel telling the king what the dream was, because the king couldn't even remember it. He says, "You saw, O king, a great image. The image, mighty and exceeding brightness, stood before you, and its appearance was frightening." This is through Nebuchadnezzar's eyes. Daniel's saying, this is what you saw. "The head of the image was of fine gold." And by the way, the reason the appearance was frightening is because every world empire, which is what this dream is about, this prophecy is about, will be frightening. When you're a village, when you're a nation and an empire is building, you become afraid of what they're doing and what they're up to. The head of this image was of fine gold. We're going to notice a couple of things as we get into this morning. First of all, every nation that is mentioned, it starts with gold and it works its way down to clay. It starts in high value and goes down in value, but it's also based on what people fight over. Back then, you didn't just build an empire to get more cattle. That was important, but you wanted gold. You wanted to overtake someone else's land and take all their gold. That's why Nebuchadnezzar removed many of the vessels in the temple, because gold was valuable and it was full of gold. So he begins going through all the different kingdoms that are about to come. So this image is going to kind of break it down for you. The kingdom of Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon, was the head of gold. Persia, the Medes and the Persians would gather. The reason there are two, all right, the breast of silver, it talks about the arms of the Persian Empire. The Medes and the Persians would come in as Daniel was even in the court of Nebuchadnezzar's son. And there were two arms, the Medes and the Persians. And when they locked up together and came together, that's the breastplate of righteousness. That's where they found their strength in the middle. They overtook Nebuchadnezzar's son's kingdom. But they wouldn't even last that long. There would come the time of Greece. There would be the thighs of brass. You see how we're going from gold to silver to brass to iron, all right? And that would be Rome. But then he talks about, again, legs, too. Remember, the Roman Empire would be split into two. There would be the East and the West Empire. Rome and Constantinople. And he's going to talk some more. Let's keep reading. Read with me. It says, "Its legs of iron," verse 33. So that's the two, the Eastern, the Western. "And its feet partly of iron and clay," 10 feet. I would remind you that the Roman Empire was broken up into 10 kingdoms, 10 provinces right before its eventual crumble. All right? As you looked, a stone was cut. So he talks about this kingdom, the next kingdom. And the reason that he said the Greek kingdom would rule the world is because Alexander the Great is quoted as saying, I've conquered the world. I've conquered the known world, and I just wish there was more to conquer. He died at a young age, really despondent and discouraged because he had done all he knew to do. He had conquered everything, and that would be the Grecian Empire. But notice this. As you looked, a stone was cut out by no human hand, and it struck the image. Gold, silver, bronze, iron. You know what the least of these is? A rock. Nobody invades another country for their stones. They're rocks. They're rubble. They're granite. He says, what you value, I don't value, God says. What kingdoms value, I don't value. I'm going to use something common. Struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold, all together, he says, every kingdom were broken into pieces and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. They blew away. The wind carried them away. Think Thanos. That's what happened, all right? That's literally the interpretation here. So that no trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the image became a great mountain. So it's natural, it's a stone, but then it's supernatural. It grows into a mountain. Jesus was human, natural, but supernatural, divine. Became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This would be a kingdom that would start with a stone and fill the whole earth. This is the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had. Now, I want to read with you the interpretation. So Daniel not only gives him the dream, he gives him the interpretation, verses 36 through 45. And you kind of already know it, but I want you to see what he says. It says, this was the dream. Now we will tell the king its interpretation. You, O king, king of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, says, God's blessed you. God has raised you up and given you this kingdom, the power, the might, and the glory. And into whose hand he has given wherever they dwell, the children. He says, wherever we know of men dwelling, like they send you money. They send you tax. They send you usury. The beasts of the field, the birds of the heavens, making you rule over them all. You are the head. And by the way, one other place where it's mentioned one man ruling over the heavens, the birds of the air, the animals. This is really a reference back to Adam. He's like, you have a real power here that no one has seen since Adam. You have raised up the first real world empire here that's ruling, as it were, the whole known world. You are the head of gold. He says, I got good news for you, Nebuchadnezzar. You are the head of gold. But I want to remind you, you don't last forever. Another kingdom inferior to you, get this, you're going to be overtaken by a smaller kingdom. Somebody little, they're going to bond together and they're going to overtake you. Inferior to you shall rise after you in the third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over the earth. That's the statement there that Alexander the Great would make. Read on. And there shall be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron. This is the Roman Empire. Because iron breaks to pieces and shatters all things, and like iron that crushes, it shall break and crush all these. The Roman rule was strong. They had a way of breaking people down, crushing anybody who stood in their way. And as you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it shall be divided kingdom. But some of the firmness of iron shall be in it. So there's some parts of the Roman kingdom that would hold on, that would survive. As a matter of fact, I don't know if you know this, there's a lot of Roman culture in us. As a matter of fact, most traditional weddings, the reason the bride and the groom stand where they stand, that's a Roman wedding tradition. A lot of us still use the Roman calendar. Like, there are so many things that the Roman Empire still lives on today. He said, verse 42, and the toes and the feet were partly iron, partly clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly brittle. There were some portions of the Roman Empire that lived on and were stronger and survived longer, but then there are other parts that just broke away really easily and brittle. Verse 43, as you saw the iron mixed with soft clay, so they will mix with one another in marriage, but they will not be together, just as iron does not mix with clay. Verse 44, and in the days of these kings, and this is the emphasis here, this is what he wants to make known. In the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed. Not during the Greco Empire, the Empire of Greece, not during the Medes and the Persians' rule, not even during Nebuchadnezzar's rule. This is during the Roman rule, during the Iron Age. There will be a kingdom set up that will never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left. This isn't something where the king is going to die and pass it on. Jesus is not going to hand this kingdom over to anybody else. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. Just as you saw that a stone was cut from a mountain by no human hand, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, a great God has made known to the king what shall be after this. He says, God's given you an interpretation of the future. This dream is certain. its interpretation, sure. I want to point your attention back to that image, that statue. These things took place just as Daniel laid them out. After the kingdom of Babylon fell, the Medes and the Persians bound together, and they overtook that world kingdom. It wasn't as strong, but Daniel was still there for that, because I would remind you, when he interprets this dream, he's 15, 16 years old. He outlives Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar dies. His son takes over, and his son, like a lot of people who inherit a whole lot of power that didn't earn it, has no idea what to do with it. He's partying one night, and Daniel says, we're going to lose the kingdom by the morning. And the Medes and the Persians come in, and Cyrus, when he's king, Daniel is still in his courtyard. He's in his 80s, and Daniel gets to see this second kingdom set up, the Medes and the Persians, the Persian Empire that raises up. That's the breastplate of silver. But then Greece comes along, and Alexander the Great, he conquers the known world. And the Roman Empire, the legs, the eastern, the western. And it's during the Roman Empire, and while it's divided, that this kingdom is set up with a stone. Something that people don't care about. Something that is overlooked and undervalued. God does not raise up kingdoms. God does not raise up the supernatural, the kingdom of heaven, in the same way that every other kingdom has risen up. These kingdoms rose up by conquering, subjugating, enslaving, stealing, and killing. This kingdom will be raised up by serving, by loving, by dying for, instead of putting to death. This kingdom of heaven would be different than every other kingdom. It would outlast every other kingdom, and it would be a kingdom that would never be divided and never fall apart. I want you to notice the response, before we really get into the meaty details here, of how Nebuchadnezzar responds, and this is a lot of our problem. He sees in front of him the spiritual. So he's overcome, but he doesn't know what to do with it, and he doesn't know how to worship God, so he worships the thing in front of him. Read with me chapter 2 and verse 46. It says, "Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and paid homage to Daniel." He doesn't know how to worship God, so he worships the next best thing. He worships what's in front of him. I would remind you that he's caught up in statues. He's caught up in kings. He's caught up in empires. He's caught up in the physical. Like many of us, he has a hard time wrapping his mind around the spiritual because he's so consumed by the physical. This is why we're so careful to allow money, to allow sex, to allow things that we can touch, feel, see, spend, enjoy to consume our hearts, because this world is so much more than just physical. It's emotional. It's spiritual. And so he begins, he's the king, the most powerful man in the world. He bows down. He forgets he's the king. He starts worshiping Daniel. And he says, he commands an offering and incense be offered him. He's like, dude, this is the guy, y'all. We need to worship him. Go get some incense. How do we worship other gods? Let's worship him the same way. The king answered and said, Daniel, truly, your God is the God of gods. I wish he'd have started there, but he starts worshiping Daniel. But he's still got some nuggets of truth here. He's like, your God is the God of gods, Lord of kings and revealer of mysteries. For you have been able to reveal this mystery. Then the king gave Daniel high honors, many great gifts, and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief protector over all the wise men of Babylon. Daniel, a teenager who was ripped from his homeland, robbed of his manhood, is now elevated to a place of power and influence, the likes of which no other teenager has ever seen. But I want you to notice what he says. And this is, we see Nebuchadnezzar's response. I want you to notice Daniel's response. I want you to think to yourself, I've been faithful. I haven't eaten the king's meat. I haven't drank the king's wine. I've been faithful. I've done everything I've been asked. I now get the chance to do whatever I want. Would you put to death your competitors, those wise men, those Chaldeans, who are eventually going to try to put you to death? Would you say, you're right, O king. As a matter of fact, what I say goes. And I'm telling you right now, you need to let us Hebrews go home. You need to let us go back to our families. You need to let us go back to our villages. You need to let us return to Jerusalem. You've done a terrible thing. That's not what he does. He doesn't say anything about himself. Instead, Daniel made a request of the king, verse 49, and he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, as three friends of his, over the affairs of the province of Babylon, so that he could keep them close, and Daniel remained on the king's court. Remember how at the end of last week, he went to his friends and he said, I'm going to go before the king and I don't even know the interpretation yet. You need to pray. He didn't forget who was praying for him, who was there for him, who had supported him, who had strengthened him before he went before the king, and he made sure they were elevated and protected before he did anything else. And then he served this king who ripped him from his homeland. He served this king who was very different than him. So this morning, we see the dream, we see the interpretation. I want you to understand that prophecy is powerful. It's incredible that God allowed the dream of Nebuchadnezzar to wrap all of this up. But there's two things that I'm afraid a lot of us Christians miss. And a passage like this is so rich with prophecy and filled with the coming Messiah. I mean, it's so good, but there's some things we miss when we read through passages like this. Number one, we need to acknowledge that we all, if we're not careful, idolize our dreams and empires a little too much. King Nebuchadnezzar saw that statue, and it was everything he wanted. It was his idol. It was his dream. This was his empire. This was what he was going to do with his life. And now that he had it, it would drive him mad. It would drive him crazy. As a matter of fact, in a couple of chapters, he's going to lose his mind. There's a reason that some of us are so disappointed when everything doesn't go our way. There's a reason some of us get so distracted, so discouraged, so mad, so angry, so furious when everything doesn't work out our way. It's because we've made our plans and our dreams and our empires that we're going to build the idol by which we live our lives. We've said, this is how it's got to go. I've got to make this much. I've got to earn this much. I've got to have this much. I have to look this way. I have to act this way. I need to live this long. I need to be in this kind of health. And I'm telling you right now, we live in a world that will overwhelm you with all the things you have to do to be successful, the things you have to do to be getting it done, the things you should be doing. I love my phone, but I told you last week, I feel like my phone peaked 3 years ago, and it's been getting worse and worse. The amount of things I'm told I need to be doing on a constant basis by the things I see on Instagram and the things I see on Facebook, man, they're discouraging, and I'm disappointed. I see things like, I'll see somebody working on their house, I'm like, man, my bathroom should look like that. I should be better at laying tile. I'll watch somebody put a fence up, like, man, I can put a fence up, but if I put a fence up that way, and before I know it, I want to be the best tile layer, I want to be the best fence person. I don't even do these things for a living. I just do them occasionally at my house. I'll see somebody talking about their car, and how they work on it, and I'll think to myself, man, I should get better at rolling my sleeves up and working on my car. And before I know it, I want to be 100 different things because I've seen 100 different things online. And I've begun to idolize the person I think I want to be instead of who God's called me to be, where he's positioned me to be, who he's gifted me to be. Can I just be completely transparent with you? I am easily swayed. I can see something, watch something, see somebody celebrated for something and think, man, I should be doing that. I wonder if I could do that. One week it's politics, and I think, man, maybe I could be a politician. I'll watch the Oscars, and I'll be like, man, I wonder if I could have been an actor, right? I'll watch the Grammys, and I'm gonna tell you what, I know I can't sing, so that one just, I change the channel, right? But if we're not careful, we get inundated with all these different things we think we should be doing. Because our plans aren't big enough. Our empire's got to be just a little bit bigger. I hope you have plans. I don't want you to hear this morning me saying, don't have plans, don't have dreams. No. I want you to be careful about allowing your plans, your dreams, your empires to become your idol. About you being devastated when you turn 45 and you weren't where you thought you'd be at 45. I don't want you to be devastated when you're 30 and you don't have 3 kids yet. I don't want you to feel completely disappointed because you turn 45 and you're not making X amount of dollars. I want you to have plans. I want you to strive. I want you to do all these things. But I want to remind you that Daniel found himself enslaved, speaking a new language. Whole life's plan changed before he was 20 years old. You don't think he had plans? You don't think that as a young man he dreamed of having a family? Growing old in the temple, sharing stories about God's faithfulness with his kids and his grandkids? He would never enjoy that freedom. It would be ripped from him. 2 men in this story. One dreams of building an empire. One embraces where God's placed him. And it's amazing the difference. The king is unstable. He's angry. He's dangerous. He's a reckless threat to himself and others. But the man who's embraced where he is younger, wiser, stable, encouraged. It's amazing how free he's living considering he's a slave, isn't it? He has freedom of heart, freedom of spirit, freedom from anxiety. He has a complete dependence on God. It is amazing how we can live in the land of the free and yet feel so far from free if we aren't careful. Free from the cares of this world, the anxiety of what we have or don't have, the need for success or fame or whatever it is you've been convinced will fill your soul, I want to encourage you to be careful not to idolize your dreams and your empires, because here's the truth. Sometimes life doesn't work out the way you planned. It was true for Daniel. Crazy part, Nebuchadnezzar, it actually went the way he thought, but not for the right reason. He thought it was all about him. God's reminding him, you were a blip on my radar. Can we be blunt this morning? You wouldn't know who Nebuchadnezzar was this morning if it weren't for the Bible. I mean, I took history. Don't get me wrong. Like, I probably would have remembered it for a test, maybe a paper here or there, but most of us would not know this guy's name. He is a blip on the historical radar. God allowed his kingdom to raise up so that God could build something bigger than just another kingdom. And that brings me to the second truth we need to acknowledge. God's plan is much bigger than our dreams, than our empires. Nebuchadnezzar would build his empire, so would Alexander the Great, but God was working on something much bigger. And Daniel has this way of seeing not just this decade that's going to be hard for him, not even his life full of decades. He would live. He would outlive the lions in the den. He would outlive those wise men who tried to have him killed. He would live. But even Daniel's life is short in comparison to what God was doing. Daniel had lived through the rise of Babylon. He would live through the rise of the Medes and the Persians. He would die. Another kingdom would come. Another kingdom would come. Rome would rise up. It would falter. But God would build something even bigger and even longer lasting. Read with me Daniel chapter 2, verses 44 and 45 one more time. And in the days of those kings during the Roman Empire, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed. Governments have tried to stamp out God's word, the church, the way, the gospel. It hasn't worked. Newspapers have written, this is the age of God dying, God is dead, God is no more. 50 years ago, they were forecasting that churches would be empty, no one would believe because of science. Look, I embrace science. I use science all the time. I go to the doctor. I'm so thankful for the breakthroughs we have. There are people in this room who are alive today because of the breakthroughs of science, but science has not negated God. Science hasn't gotten rid of faith. This morning, this kingdom will never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another. Jesus isn't going to abdicate the throne and be like, it's been good. I've enjoyed these 2,000 years. I'm really excited about this next phase where I'm going to take it easy. No, like, he's not. He's not a man. He's not just some guy, just some king. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms. Every kingdom has come and gone. This kingdom will outlast it. And bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. Just as you saw that a stone was cut from a mountain by no human hand. This isn't just natural, it's supernatural. And that it broke in pieces, the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold. And a great God has made known to the king what shall be after this. The dream is certain, and its interpretation sure. Can I read you 1 Peter? What Peter, who lived with Jesus, who walked with Jesus, who witnessed Jesus after the resurrection, said of Jesus, says, as you come to him, this Jesus, a living stone, rejected by men, but in the sight of God, chosen and precious. Everyone wants the gold, the silver, the bronze. God chose a stone. You yourselves, like living stones. This is about the time where Christians are first called Christians, little Christs. Peter embraces that. And he says, you know what? They're right. We are little Christs. God is building a house full of stones, little miniature versions of the living stone, being built up as a spiritual house, to be a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. I have very good news for you this morning. Though your plans and dreams may be small in comparison to eternity, God has a plan for your life that is much bigger than what you can see and experience right now. God would use a little boy named Daniel, and he was a boy. He's a teenager. Hadn't even finished high school if there was high school back then yet. And God would use him. Everyone else wants to be around Nebuchadnezzar, but God is using Daniel, and Daniel would outlast Nebuchadnezzar. And he longs to use you in the same way. He has a plan and a purpose for you. But there are some truths we need to acknowledge that are a little bit painful. When we hear about Daniel's life, we like to think about the lion's den, and he didn't eat the king's meat. Those were two very exciting moments. during a long, painful journey where he was faithful to God. Most of us, if we acknowledge the real expense that Daniel paid for his faith, we would not trade places with him. Ripped from our families, the hope of a family ripped from our hearts. Forced to serve a king who had killed many of your friends, put your people into subjugation, enslaved them, taken their best, their wisest, their strongest, taken their soldiers, taken their money, taken their land, their freedom. Forced to live in a country he didn't understand or really like, didn't know the language at first, constantly fighting battles, political battles he never wanted, people who wanted him dead just because he was faithful. And yet Daniel embraces where he is. I said this during first service, and I don't like the way it sounds. I don't like that it's true, but it is. Every one of us know that life is not fair. We need to also acknowledge that sometimes when we're following God, when we're doing what's right, it doesn't get better. If this were me, and the king calls me in, and I interpret the dream, before I walk in that room, I wonder what I would pray, but I'm pretty sure I know how I'd feel. I'd pray, God, I pray you give me the dream and the interpretation, and if it's worth anything, I pray that the dream reminds this king how wicked he is, reminds this king that he stole my family, reminds this king that he has stolen my people, reminds this king that what he's done to me is wrong. And so, God, if anything, I pray that you, through this dream, would judge him, would free me, and change my circumstance. That would be my prayer, but that's not how Daniel follows God. Instead, he tells this pride-filled man that he is a head of gold. His kingdom would last. It would eventually be overtaken, but it would be many years. Because God isn't interested in fixing right now. God has a bigger plan. We live in a broken world, and every one of us want God to fix it right now. I pray it every day. God, heal the hurting. God, comfort those who are mourning. You guys know that I'm very emotional. It doesn't take much for me to cry. I cannot stand human suffering. I can't stand the sight of it, the thought of it. It moves me to action like nothing else. I want to change everything I see that is broken in this world. I want to end hunger. I want to end poverty. I wish we could end war. But so many of those things that I just talked about, they're not things that just happen. They're things that we choose. Let's be blunt and let's be honest. We choose to do these things to each other if we're not careful. We enslave one another. We harm one another. We kill one another. We use one another. We hate one another. We abuse each other. And instead of intervening, God says, you have this thing called free will. I've allowed you to choose right or wrong, and more often than not, we as people choose wrong. And as much as I want to fix right now, Daniel in this passage reminds us to keep an eye on the bigger picture. Now I'm going to do what I can where I can. When Daniel saw injustice, he spoke up. When Daniel saw something wrong, he spoke up. This is the part I don't want to say. God reminded Daniel that though his life would be filled with suffering, there was no undoing the fact that Daniel was a eunuch, that could never be restored. He would never have a family. God had a way of reminding Daniel. Daniel, there can be a purpose in your pain. I can use your life. And your life will be short. You will live decades. You will live past your 80s, yes. But you will have a reward that is greater than a life here. Nebuchadnezzar will live a life of reward here. He will enjoy the best food, the best pleasure, the wealth, the power, the fame, the success, the sex, you name it. He's got it, dude, but it's short. And this feels so shallow, but those of you who know me know I don't mean this to be shallow, and I don't mean to be frank or blunt or to downplay what you're going through or what I'm going through, but I want to remind us that this life is short. And though Daniel would never get the opportunity to tell his sons about his exploits, to tell his daughters of how faithful God was, Daniel would find himself in heaven one day with a much larger family. He never had kids who knew his name, but he got to heaven and people knew his name. And here's what I like to think about. You know, in heaven, I'm sure there are people who come up to Daniel on a regular basis and say, Daniel, tell us about the lion's den. He said, I'll tell you about the lion's den. They say, Daniel, tell us about when all you had to eat was water and salad. And he said, I'll tell you about that. Daniel, were you afraid when you went before Nebuchadnezzar? I was afraid, but I trusted in God. And the stories he never got to share with his kids or his grandkids, he has been rehearsing for generation after generation after generation. I hope you don't hear this the wrong way, but I want to encourage you, those of you who are struggling with something physical, something financial, something emotional, something spiritual, something in your marriage, something in your kids. I want to encourage you, this life is short. The best of this life is short. The worst of this life is short. This is life on earth, and it is hard, and it is full of suffering. It is full of celebration. Look, there were high fives that night. Daniel and Azariah are jumping up, high-fiving, fist bumping. They are excited. There are highs. There are lows the night before he's thrown into the lion's den. But this is life, and there's something on the other side of this life that God has taken into account here. Daniel, I want to fix your problem. Daniel, I want to get you out of that courtyard. Daniel, I want to honor you, but here's the deal. I'm using you right now to point to something bigger. There's a stone that's coming. There's a kingdom that will never be removed. There's something we've got to fix. More than we need to fix this. More than we need to fix the Hebrew problem right now. I want to fix the human problem of sin, of enslavement to the bondage of sin, greed, lust, anger, vengeance and hate and lust. I want to get this conquered, not just this empire, because this empire is going to come and go, Daniel. There's going to be more empires that come and go. There's going to be struggle after struggle after struggle, but we got to fight the root here. We got to fight the problem. We got to fix human nature itself. The heart of the problem is a relationship with God, and I'm going to raise up a kingdom through a stone, a living stone. And whereas the world wants the gold, they want the silver, I'm going to use stones. I'm going to use everyday regular people. So Daniel, I need you to stay the course. I need you to stay where you are. I need you to see that I'm doing something bigger than right now. And so Christian, I want you to hear me this morning, and I want to encourage you. You may feel like a nobody. You may feel like God doesn't know what you're going through. You may feel like God has forgotten about you. You may feel like Daniel, your use, your knowledge, your talents are not being best used. His talents are being used for a guy who doesn't even like God or the things of God or God's people or anything that even acknowledges God. And Daniel said, this is the guy you want me to help? You may feel like Daniel this morning, but God has a bigger plan than what you see right now. And so I want us to embrace some hard truths this morning. Life may be hard. We may find ourselves like Daniel, going through something that we never planned, finding ourselves in our 30s and 40s, not living out what we thought we'd experience at that age, still stuck where we thought we'd be at 22, still stuck where we thought we'd be at 25, frustrated and angry at what's going wrong in our life. But God says, I want you to see something bigger than what's right in front of you. Daniel, I'm not going to fix it this week. I'm not even going to fix it in your lifetime. The people of God would stay in Babylon. They would be here, but I'm working on something bigger than freeing you. I'm working on freeing boys and girls who are going to be born 3,000 years from now and don't even know they have a need of God. And Daniel embraces it. He says, God, if this is where you have me, this is where I'll be. Do you notice where he's laid at the end of that verse, at the end of that chapter? He stayed in the king's courtyard. I don't know, but it sounds to me like at this point, if he had told Nebuchadnezzar, I'm a god, let me go, Nebuchadnezzar may very well have done it. He doesn't. He stays where God put him. This morning, some of us hate where God has put us. We are frustrated at how our plans, our dreams, our empires aren't coming to fruition. They're not building out the way we thought. And some of it's us, but some of it is, God, what are you doing? I want to encourage you this morning to do your best to see more than this week, this year, this decade, this life, and focus your eyes on the eternal, the spiritual. This is where I'm going to lose you. I'm going to struggle with you because Daniel struggled with Nebuchadnezzar. Did you notice what Nebuchadnezzar did when he was moved spiritually by this? He's like, this is incredible. he starts worshiping Daniel because Daniel is physical and he's right in front of him. Some of you this morning, God's been speaking to your heart, and the thing you're going to do when you walk out of here is you're going to immediately run to the spirit, the physical. You're going to say, okay, I want to be like Daniel. I want to embrace God's purpose in my life. So I need to find something to do. I need to find something to give to God. These are good things to do. I want you to find something to do. I want you to give to God. But hear me, before we get to the physical, I want you to start with the spiritual. Daniel's frustration with Nebuchadnezzar was that he always leaned on him and never to God. It was always Daniel and then to Daniel's God. Listen to me. Don't let me lose you here, because this is hard. Some of us in this room, before we deal with the physical, we need to deal with the spiritual right here in our heart. We need to start saying, God, what are you doing in me? Not my circumstance, not where I find myself, not my finances, not my physical body. And look, I'm praying with you. Some of you have been filling out this same prayer request for physical healing, for freedom financially. I'm praying with you. But first, let's go a little bit farther back and let's work here. God, what are you doing in me? What is it you're trying to show me through this? What is it that I can learn through this? What grace do I need to embrace as a part of this? What is it that you're doing in me? That's where Nebuchadnezzar never seemed to get it, and that's why he loses his mind in a couple of chapters. Hear me out. I want you to grow spiritually, and that is what I believe leads to growth in every other area of your life. God doesn't just want you to acknowledge his ways with money. He wants you to acknowledge him. God doesn't want you to just acknowledge his ways in how we behave, in how we live, in what we say. Too many of us are trying to be Christians with our actions before we become Christians in our attitude to God himself. Spiritually, he's asking this question: do you trust me? Daniel, you got the rest of your life in this awful circumstance. Do you trust me? I was there for you with the wine issue when you wouldn't drink it. I was there for you in this interpretation. I'll be there for your 3 friends in chapter 3 when everyone else is bowing down and they don't. Do you trust me? This is the heart of the matter. Nebuchadnezzar trusts in what he sees. Daniel trusts in a God he cannot touch. My prayer for you this morning is not that God would fix your circumstance, not that God would free you financially, not that God would fix everything in your life that you think he needs to fix, but that God would focus your attention on what he's doing in your heart. You would find spiritual freedom, an understanding of his purpose in your life. I have known people who found purpose in their pain, in their diagnosis, in their hardship, through which they were able to minister to hundreds and thousands of people because they embraced the hardship God had allowed in their life. I want that for you. I want that. But it's a conversation you've got to have with God. That's my prayer for you.